Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from Qur'anic.com. Today is Sunday the 5th of September 2021 and I was going to make a further installment of my series of videos between the surahs 50 to 114, and I made one, but when I got to the end of it, this was a few days ago, I found that all the audio was missing, so I'm going to attempt that again tomorrow, God willing, and see how we go with that. But what I wanted to do today was address a subject quite quickly, and this, if you don't know my work, you may not understand why I'm coming at this subject, but what I want to talk about is why I hold the elite to account. Now, within my worldview, and not only my worldview, in the view of the Qur'an, it's quite clear that ruling elites are a natural phenomenon, naturally occurring phenomenon. Now, in our time, we've been, well, the so-called, well, formerly democratic countries were in some ways flattered into believing that the people on the plantation, that their opinion was worth something and was taken into account. Obviously, those sorts of illusions are melting into the morning mist currently, but nevertheless, for quite a long time, it was useful to the ruling elites to give people the impression that their opinion mattered, or that they were in some way influencing the levers of power. Now, of course, this isn't true. What's always happened through all of history is that a few dominant men rule and other people are ruled. And within my understanding of the Qur'an, if you we have basically two genotypes. There's the jinn, and I am talking here about jinn and not jinnah, and then al-ins, and ins are, you, me, everybody else. And the jinn, there are two words in the Qur'an. There's jinn, well, actually there's more than two. There's jan, various different words, and what happens is that the traditionalist conflates all these and treats them all as though they're the same thing, and clearly they're not. If you want to go through my analysis of what the jinn are, the various types of jinn, and it's from a pan-textual point of view, you can get all that for free from Qur'anic.com. If you go to either of the books and go to the appendix section, which you can download separately, there are 3 articles. The first is on the Salat and Zakat, and why it cannot, just simply those terms cannot mean what the traditionalist says that they mean, based on his extraneous literature. A solution to the mysterious letters, which the traditionalist wasn't able to come anywhere close in 1400 years, and his extraneous literature wasn't of any help to him there, and also this analysis on the jinn. Now, the reason why I mention this is because in my worldview, and I would argue in the view of the Qur'an, we have these people who are rulers. Pharaoh being the archetypal ruler. And if you would like to look at my work on the God protocol, I argue, in fact demonstrate, that all of the characteristic sins of all of the former peoples, including those the original recipients of the preaching of Muhammad, were destroyed. And we can go through and list, actually I tabulate all of their sins, beginning with idolatry and polytheism and so on, going through to the promotion of sodomy, and also the corruption of women. And when I say corruption of women, I mean corruption of women and turning women into something that they're not naturally. All of these sins, usury, you name it, cruelty to animals, they're all there. Absolutely, each, you have characteristic sins for each culture or each community that was destroyed. And in this culture, in this world culture, that's called the global civilization, or whatever you want to call it, has a single language, which is English. It has a single religion, which is materialism. It has a single economic system, which is based on usury and speculation. It has a single pharmaceutical ideology. It has a single education system. It has a single cultural system, various types of entertainment and so on. I demonstrate that it's one thing. It's one single, de facto, it's one culture. And that this culture has within it all of the sins for which if you took them all together, all of the previous cultures, all the previous communities for which we have record in the Qur'an were destroyed. And I argue not only that that this culture, this civilization will be destroyed, but that it will be destroyed in toto, that it will be totally annihilated. In fact, that's the only outcome. That's the only possible outcome. Also, I would say that we deserve it. This idea that somehow we don't deserve a bad time. Of course, we deserve it. Every single thing we've bent over for everything else. All of the destruction of all of our cultures, actually, all of them, all of our religions, all of our pre-existing education systems, all of our natural knowledge, all of our agricultural systems, actually everything. We sort of bent with every breeze in the face of this tsunami of global, if you want to use that word, culture, civilization, and now they're rolling out the new part of it. Just before I get onto my main topic, what I demonstrate in that is that actually that Muhammad was the prophet. He was the messenger of God to mankind altogether, and in order for that part of his mission to be operable, to be pertinent, the whole world had to exist as one thing, as the thing that I've just described. Now, there's no way that this could happen in the time of Muhammad, because Muhammad wasn't a speaker of Arabic. He was subject to the local mores and cultural imperatives of the culture that he grew up in and lived in. But his revelation has been preserved, and what I show is that there's one bit missing, which is actually in the Qur'an, which needed to be kind of, as it were, executed on in order to make, just to join up the wires of this task or mission of warning to mankind altogether. Now, all of that's laid out in the God Protocol, and you can download it for free and read it at your leisure. But what I want to talk about here is to do with this, because my interest is not with the masses. It's not that I don't care about people individually. I'm just only interested in the organ grinder and have no interest in the monkeys. People will, as has been demonstrated, and I'll get to in a minute, basically believe whatever they're told to. The idea, we've been, I suppose, lulled into this idea, or flattered, I think is a better word, because really democracy is a form of flattery, a baseless flattery actually, which is the idea that everyone's unique and amazing. And you hear this all the time, ad nauseum. Everyone is unique and amazing. I've never met, in fact, I fail to remember a single normal person that I've met or seen online. Everyone's just somehow stunningly amazing in some unique way. So much so that the word unique has actually lost its meaning. I mean, unique by definition means one of a kind. There is no other like it. But if you look at the American usage, the word unique has just become, oh, that's very unique. It's become like a comparative. So the language has adapted to adopt the insanity and delusion of the majority of the people who use it. So what I'm interested in is not the masses. I'm not trying to change, brand Islam. I'm not trying to do anything like that. I'm not interested in any of it. Those things are happening, whether it's, the destruction of the West, or it's the destruction of, say, for example, Indian culture, or the destruction of men, just on, across the board, the promotion of feminism, whatever level of insanity it is that's going on. This, in my view at least, is absolutely nothing to do with, you, me, Joe Blow, doesn't matter. It's an agenda. It's an agenda agreed upon at the top. And it's, we're living through it line item by line item. And so what I really want to get to in this talk is why I hold the elites to account, why my entire presentation is really to do with them and not to do with anyone else. If you look at say, for example, in the Qur'an about Pharaoh, it said Pharaoh swayed his people and they followed him. Pharaoh had these particular, there was Pharaoh who was the head of the military arm of this, I suppose what you would call it is an oligarchy. You have Qarun, who was the head of the, I suppose he was the head of the economic wing. This is the equivalent of the Bank of International Settlements or the federal, so-called Federal Reserve. And then you have Hammam, who was he was the head of the, I suppose, the kind of psychological warfare area of this, and we have complete equivalents of this today. So my argument isn't about people, about so many people think this or so many people think that, or so many people like you or so many people follow you, or that more is better. No, it's irrelevant from a Qur'anic point of view. From the Qur'anic point of view, what you have are individual warners who go to individual, usually the leaders of particular societies, warn them, and once those warnings have been either rejected or they've tried to kill the messenger or whatever it is, then the punishments of God become binding. It's a protocol. It's just like if you, I don't know, it's a mechanism. If you leave your car parked here between the hours of 7 and 9 on a Tuesday, Thursday or Saturday, you will get a fine of 450 euros. Let's say it's as simple as that. It's nothing to do with how bad things get. It's nothing to do with, oh, it's so terrible now, God must come and make it all end, or blah blah blah. Things have been terrible before. I mean, look, Stalin, Mao Zedong, whoever it was. Look what the British did in some of the countries they destroyed. I mean, terrible things have happened before. So it's not a matter of degree. It's a matter of understanding the mechanism. It's a bit like a lock, Locks, locks don't care what your feelings are. They don't care. They have a certain number of tumblers or whatever it is inside, and if you meet the kind of the prerequisites of those patterns and fit a key inside and turn it, it will turn. It's as simple as that. And if you don't, it won't. And this is what the Qur'an has. It has a very set pattern, and this pattern repeats. And it was this pattern that Muhammad was following in. This is the great tradition. Unfortunately, what's happened is that the traditionalists, and I'm not here just to sort of bang on against the traditionalists, this what the traditionalist has done to the Qur'an is what religions always do. It says in the Qur'an, that after each of the messengers, they're followed after people after them, casting into what the messenger brought. Well, this is precisely what they did. And the Christians are exactly the same. They took the message of Jesus insofar as we still have it, and kind of strung it together with a whole different narrative. And if you look at the way the New Testament is constructed, it's, in fact, if you look at the Christian Bible as opposed to the Hebrew Bible, what you have is they've actually got the Old Testament, what they call the Old Testament, in different order. It'll end with the book of Malachi. And the reason why they want it to end with the book of Malachi is because there are one or two bits in Malachi that kind of make it look like Jesus is coming next. And then you turn over the page, it says New Testament, and then you go into the book of Matthew. Well, the Hebrew, the Tanakh, does not end in the book of Malachi. It ends in the second book of Chronicles, if I'm not mistaken. And if the Christian Bible ended in Second Chronicles, it would make it a lot harder to make this quantum leap into what they want to say about Jesus. But then if you read about Jesus in the book of Matthew, the book of Matthew is one of three what they're called synoptic gospels. They're basically the same story told slightly differently. In fact, they are told actually quite differently if you look at the details of their telling. But then if you go through Matthew, Mark and Luke, okay, if you just had Matthew, Mark and Luke, what kind of conclusions would you come to? Well, you wouldn't come to the kind of conclusions that you get from reading John, because all the stuff about I am the way, the truth and the life, no man cometh unto the Father but by me, understood as no man comes to God unless he believes that Jesus Christ is, whatever it is they claim about him, that's in John. It's not anywhere else. What about, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoso believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. That's only in John. That's nowhere else. Now, that's a big miss. Let's say you just had Mark, which is the earliest ever gospel, and it doesn't have this in it anywhere. If this were so true, you'd think, excuse me, why isn't it in this one? This isn't just like a minor part of doctrine. No. And actually, for what it's worth, the book of Mark, the end of the book of Mark, the last half or more of the last chapter of Mark, mainly most of the last chapter of Mark, was only written much later, because Mark, which is the first written gospel, ends very lamely. They go to the tomb. Jesus apparently isn't there. And they thought, oh dear, or whatever, and went home. It's a bit of a downer ending, isn't it? So after these other Gospels came out, where Jesus ascends into the heavens and all the rest of it, whoever it was looked at Mark and thought, oh dear, he's kind of missing a bit. And so they wrote this later. And not only, if you look at it, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is where it says about, and they shall take up snakes, and, if they drink any poison thing, it will not harm them. This was written later. I mean, somebody should tell the sort of the snake charmers of the Appalachians about this, because that whole bit is a complete forgery. My point is that when you get through these three synoptic gospels, you get into the realms of John, which is completely different. It's a kind of Gnostic, where it's what it is sort of increasing Christology. And when you get to John, it's a completely different narrative to either Matthew, Mark, or Luke. And, that matters. What I'm trying to say is the way that the information is presented. The medium is the message, as it were. Okay, so you swallow Malachi and accept their explanation. You go through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and, by this point, it all kind of hangs together, although with quite a lot of contradictions. Then you're kind of hit with John, which is this different narrative altogether, and then you kind of pop out into the book of Acts. Now, the purpose for the book of Acts, and I'm going to kind of relate this to what the traditionalist has done in a minute. The purpose of the book of Acts is to get you off Jesus of whatever kind and onto Paul, because Paul is the creator. Paul is the al-Bukhari of Christianity. Paul's the guy who's going to tell you what this all means. Paul's the guy who never met Jesus, not once, and yet he's the guy who's going to tell you what this all means. Paul's the guy who had, even by his own, and he wrote his own histories, or people who followed him wrote his histories. Paul's the guy who had open arguments with the people who actually knew Jesus. But Paul has this also not, Paul makes a lot of claims for himself as a Pharisee of Pharisees, studied under Gamaliel, whoever it was, and yet he should have known that his own testimony would not have been accepted in a Sanhedrin. Why? Because there's just one man. I saw this, the heavens opened and Jesus spoke to me, oh Paul, why dost thou kick against the pricks, and all the rest of it. Who cares? In fact, there was somebody else there, but they didn't see it. It's just one man's testimony. It wouldn't have been acceptable. It would not have been accepted in a court of law at that time. Now, I'm sure you can see the parallels here, because now what you've got is, with the Qur'an, what's being used to usurp it is an entirely different literature, which by its own genre of isnad is by definition hearsay. And then after you get through Paul, and actually Paul's writings predate even Mark. So if you were to look at how this book was written, Paul wrote his stuff, then Mark came out, and then whichever it was, Matthew and Luke, and then finally John. The whole presentation of it is highly spurious. Now, does it contain some of the words of God? Or certainly some. But to say that all of this thing is scripture is, well, I'd say a highly dubious statement. What we have is the traditionalist religion really kind of not doing exactly the same thing, but something sort of similar. What we have is the traditionalist rabbi, if you want to call him that, who does something kind of similar, because what he claims is that what Moses received on Mount Sinai was an unwritten Torah, an oral Torah. And yet we know in the Qur'an it says that what Moses received was an explanation of all things. So it wasn't that he received this and he received something else like it, but this is fundamentally what the traditionalist is claiming. So the reason why I went into that was to say that quite clearly the tendency to muddy the waters and to overlay scripture with other stuff. It's not the preserve of any particular religion. It seems to be kind of like a human thing. But it is something which the traditionalist has certainly done. There's no question about that in my mind. Now, what I really want to talk about was the elites. In my view, the traditionalists' religion, and I'm absolutely prepared to accept that there are good individual traditionalists who, for whatever reason, it seems to make some sort of sense to them that they don't see any total contradiction between, whatever they're getting in the hadith and what they're getting in the Qur'an. But to me, that was obvious. They're different narratives. They don't comport. The Muhammad of the Qur'an and the Muhammad of the hadith, they're different characters. The Muhammad of the Qur'an, he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know about the Day of Judgment. He's just told to warn from the Qur'an. He's just following the footsteps of the previous messengers and so on. Whereas the Muhammad of the Hadith is a different narrative character. It's kind of like Yoda. There's nothing that he doesn't know, and he can pronounce on absolutely every subject. And you can kind of have one or you can have the other, but you can't have them both because they're oil and water. They don't go together. But the traditionalist needs them to go together, and it's kind of like a similar sort of problem to the one that the Christians have got as regards the Old Testament. They need the Old Testament because their religion stands on the Old Testament, yet they contradict the Old Testament because they're fundamentally making a kind of Greco god out of Jesus, which just doesn't comport in any way with the idea that Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God, and yet they need that. So that's they're kind of sort of sitting on the bough of a tree and in the invidious position of actually having to kind of chop off the branch which they're sitting on. Now, the reason why I'm kind of getting into all of that is because in my view, at least, religions generally speaking are constructed and in order to serve the interests, if you want to call it that, at least in a very temporary way, of a ruling elite. And in my view, ruling elites have always existed, and I see no reason why they shouldn't exist. I'm not against there being a ruling elite. It'd be ridiculous. It would be like being against mountains having a peak, or against icebergs sort of having a summit or something like that. It's just be ridiculous. Of course there are ruling elites. Of course there are, groups of dominant men. And from my reading of the Qur'an, and what I see is that this is actually at the level almost of DNA. It's embedded. Now, I do accept that the ruling elites eject certain kind of miscreant members of their own if they mess up for long enough, and they do accept within into their ranks people who prove themselves over long enough periods of time. So the walls are somewhat porous, but generally speaking, they exist. They exist in they follow particular cults. They're highly religious in my view, and their religion, in my view, has quite a lot to do with what went on in ancient Egypt, and probably goes back even further through that. And my point is that they construct civilizations. And now, if I'd said this, I did say it 4 or 5 years ago, people kind of go, that's interesting, let's move on to the next thing. Watch, some Top Gear or whatever it is comes up next in your suggestions on YouTube. But now I can demonstrate that this is so. Now, people are malleable. Most people are malleable. Most people do not think, they will not think, and probably that's all right. I mean, I do tend to feel we have a responsibility to think, but that's because I think. But I have lived long enough to understand that most people don't. And I've seen this, that they don't. Just, through what we've lived through in my life, I'm now 54 years old, I have seen the homosexualization of Western civilization, in fact, of world civilization. It's been rolled out as an agenda item. You have to believe it. You have to be nice about it. You have to accept it. Now, my father's generation or grandfather's generation would have had a lot to say about this. Let's take feminism. Feminism has been rolled out, I suppose. I mean, they gave women the vote, I guess, that's sort of part of it. But it was really a function, fundamentally, of the First World War, all wars being fought against all sides. It's, whoever's supposedly victorious. This isn't how... ruling elites look at wars. They see wars as social engineering projects, which they most certainly are. And at the sort of in the first portion of the 20th century, they rolled out feminism which is guaranteed to destroy the family, which it does. In fact, it would be a very interesting PhD paper. I don't know if it's been done, but it would be interesting if somebody did it, to research the women who were against the so-called suffragette movement, because there were women who understood what a threat this was to them, to their feminine power, and to the family and everything else. There were women who were completely against it, but you won't hear an awful lot about those people. My point is that you can pretty much mold pretty much most people to think pretty much anything. I've seen it in my lifetime. I live abroad. I live in Russia, as it happens. I go back to the UK, or I used to when I was able to fly, but once every 5 or so years. And I would see that my family had downloaded all the new upgrades. They're using the new terminology. My mother doesn't call it. She used to call it. In America you call it the trash, right? This way you throw things away. Well, it used to be called in England. It used to be called the rubbish, which just means trash. She doesn't call it that anymore. She calls it the recycling. So I mean, that's just a very tiny example, but you see that people. These people who have been convinced, going back to the democracy thing, that their minds are their own. Clearly they're not. I mean, quite clearly you can convince people of anything. Now, if I'd said this 4 or 5 years ago, as I say, people would have kind of, that's quite an interesting idea, Sam, but let's move on to the next thing. But now I can prove it. We've seen in the last year and a half, 2 years, the rollout of an entire ideology, something which is quite so obviously false, or at least largely false. Maybe it has some small quotient of truth to it, but it is so demonstrably a lie, and a lie used in order to achieve further ends, and something that's been rolled out right across the board. Doesn't matter where you live, it's all going on. It demonstrates that you're now living under a world government with one agenda. Yeah, there's a bit of local colour here and there, but it's worse being in Australia at the moment than it is perhaps being in Sweden. But ultimately, it's the same thing, okay? It shows that the elites are one thing. It shows that they follow an agenda, but it shows something else. It shows that had they wished to make mankind righteous, to get rid of all of this filth, all of this disgusting filth which we've had rammed down our throats generation after generation, but most particularly in the 20th century, it's a 2-year project. Most people will absolutely bend over to just about anything. And that's why I hold the elites to account, because if they wanted to make humanity righteous and take away all of this OnlyFans culture and this disgusting and completely delusional, what they've done to women, it's just delusional, and to make men, as it were, on the hook, men still having to pay, men still having to keep a contract that women can renege on at any moment and take their money for the rest of their lives, actually, well, at least until the children are 18. It's and yet using your primary drives against you. They've weaponized everything, from the food to marriage to sexual attraction. I can't think of anything they haven't weaponized. Now they've weaponized flu, okay? What is essentially flu. Well, they could have done anything. They could have made humanity righteous like that. All of these, young, perverted, delusional morons walking around with their eyes glued to some sort of screen with, bolts through their faces and green hair and so on. It would, 4 or 5 years? They'd all be, they'd all be saying, Alhamdulillah, you could do it. You can train them into anything. And now I can say this with utter confidence, because we've all lived through it in a very short period of time. I mean, I used to cite other things that we've been trained in before, the sodomy agenda and, all the rest of it, the lunatic female agenda, also the kind of, the weakening of men, especially men, that whole agenda. But those were too kind of slow and in some ways gradual for people to say, yes, that's true. But this one's been quick, and this is too impacts you. This whole agenda means you can't earn anything. This whole agenda is going to put you out of business. This whole agenda is going to kill your children. This whole agenda is going to do all kinds of things, and people can, even really dumb people can see that much. So my point is this is why I hold the elites to account. It's why I'm not interested in the majority, because the majority didn't vote for this. Majority have no understanding of what's going on. The majority weren't in on the meetings where this thing was decided upon. The majority is irrelevant. Me, you, everyone watching this, we're just irrelevant. Our opinion doesn't matter, and that's why my work isn't geared toward us. It's geared towards them. And it's not that they shouldn't exist. They must exist as a function of society. That has to be a dominant minority of men who make decisions. It's just how it is. If you don't like it, it's just because you don't know any history, but that is how it really is. It's always a very small number of highly motivated men with a single plan upon which they act with resources. That's it. Everything else is a function of that. That's history. Okay? All of the wars, all of the social upheavals and so on, they're basically, I'm not saying things don't go wrong. I'm not saying, they micromanage. They don't micromanage, but they control the spigot. Now, very occasionally it might spin a bit out of control this way or that way, but they're very good at working with that. They understand that every crisis is an opportunity. They get an education that you and we don't get unless we've read some books. We just don't get this education. And my final argument is not that it's necessarily an evil thing for there to be a ruling elite. According to the Qur'an, there must be. My argument is that they could make humanity righteous, in as much time as it's taken to make most people wear a mask. All right, you could make people submit to a basic model of righteousness. Could do it in a year or two, and that's why I hold them to account, because they're the only people who matter. And that's why I've warned them. That's why my work is dedicated towards them, is directed towards them, because they are the organ grinders and we are the monkeys. So that's just the way it is. And that is the reason why my work is fundamentally directed towards the ruling elite. If other people read it and enjoy it and get something from it and learn, great, that's fantastic. But they're not my primary reason for doing what I'm doing. Because I do not subscribe to the idea that more people who agree with you makes it truer. If there's one thing that the ruling elite do know, it is that most people's opinion doesn't matter at all. Their every waking moment confirms this to them. Can you imagine being like a member of the ruling elite? I mean, I'm not talking about people like Bill Gates and so on. He's kind of like he's a top level runner, but I'm talking about people like 2 or 3 levels above him, right? People you won't see. Can you imagine waking up morning after morning, seeing these people with, 130 million Twitter subscribers or whatever it is, and thinking that they're an opinion leader or whatever, and you just think to yourself, if you only knew. They're very clever. They're generally right, certainly in their analysis, and they are right. They're right that you can manipulate, you can influence, people will follow, people do not have the vast majority of people don't have any real critical thinking skills. That's why they gave us democracy, because they knew. I mean, if how many really bright people have you met in your life? Add them up and then compare them to the amount of really stupid people you've met. And then you'll understand why democracy is a complete lie. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope everyone is well, and I will try to remake the video that I already made on Surah, whichever it was, 77, in the next couple of days. Bye for now. If you're listening on YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Qur'an and all other work free using the button in the top right-hand corner, or buy the hard copy there at 10% less than on Amazon. You can download the audio from my YouTube videos to your mobile device using the links in the drop-down below. I recommend meetquranites.com to connect with other Qur'an-alone believers. Like if you like, comment if you have something constructive to say, and subscribe to get more each week. And use the link in the drop-down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short. Eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.